The town of Silver Hollow, nestled in the shadow of the Colorado highlands, was the kind of place where everyone left their doors unlocked and paused to wave at neighbors from their porches. Life moved with the rhythm of these seasons, slow, quiet, and steady. Except when nature decided otherwise. 3 years ago, it didn't. The spring flood of that year came early and hard. Rains pounded the valley for days, melting what little snow remained in the upper passes. Theriver swelled, the earth crumbled, and grief swept in uninvited. Ethan Bennett, a local forest ranger known for his calm, steady presence, disappeared into the churning waters while rescuing a stranded hiker. His body was never found. His daughter, Laya, was 5 at the time, small, observant, always scribbling in her sketchbook. Until that day, after Ethan's death, she stopped speaking. Not out of physical injury, but from something deeper, something broken. The silence wasn't stubbornness. It was survival. Her mother, Rachel Bennett, carried the weight of both grief and motherhood in every breath. A wildlife behaviorist by training. She left her university research behind and moved them into Amethyst Cabin at the edge of the National Forest, where she once studied and where Ethan once thrived. She hoped nature might offer Isla what therapy could not, peace. But the silence in their home was different now. It was not the peaceful hush of the forest she loved. It was hollow, heavy, a constant reminder of all that had been lost. Rachel worked part-time with the local conservation bureau, mostly field surveys and camera trap analysis. The rest of her time was devoted to her daughter, hoping, waiting, watching. Leela drew. She wondered. She never spoke. And deep in the woods, something watched her. Back the storm came in the dead of night. Not thunder at first, just a long soaking rain that thickened the air and made the trees whisper like they carried secrets. Rachel had gone to bed early. The soft thrum of rain on the roof a strange comfort. But somewhere down the hall, a little girl sat wide awake, listening. Laya, now 8, sat cross-legged by her bedroom window, her small hand pressed to the cold glass. She heard it again, faint, broken, a high-pitched whine, barely a sound, more a plea. Something was out there, and it needed help. She moved through the house like a shadow, silent and precise. She pulled on her raincoat, grabbed her sketchbook almost by instinct, and slipped out the front door before anyone or anything could stop her. The creek near the trailhead turned violent from the recent melt, rising fast and swallowing the stepping stones she knew by heart. The water churned like something alive. The cries were louder now, urgent, raw. And then she saw it. A small, soaked German Shepherd puppy stranded on a shrinking patch of mud in the middle of the torrent. Its fur was plastered to its shivering frame, its legs buckling as it whimpered into the dark. Leela froze, her breath caught in a flash. Something surfaced. Not a memory exactly. She hadn't seen it. No one had let her. Buthermind had filled in the gaps over the years. The rushing water, the screaming wind, the sound of her mother crying, and the image she had created over and over again in drawings, in dreams. Her father standing in the flood, arms outstretched, disappearing into the current. It wasn't real, but it had become real enough to haunt her. The same fear clutched at her now, her legs locked in place. The current raged. The puppy cried again, her heart pounded, uncertain, and then a feeling, not a voice, not a thought, but something deeper. A sense of warmth in her chest, a pulse not her own. Be brave, and save him, Laya. It wasn't spoken, but it echoed, not outside, but somewhere within. She blinked, straightened, stepped back, kicked off her boots with a splash, and walked straight into the water. The creek bit at her ankles, climbed to her knees, dragged at her coat. Still, she moved forward. One step another, her raincoat ballooned around her. A stone shifted underfoot. She stumbled, but didn't stop. When the water reached her chest, she swam. She wasn't strong, but she was steady. The tiny island collapsed just as she reached it, and she lunged forward, arms out, Her fingers curled into the soaked scruff of the puppy's neck, pulling him close. He didn't resist. He knew she had come for him. Together, they turned toward the shore and froze. Standing at the edge of the bank were 7 full-grown German shepherds, silent, unmoving, eyes glinting amber in the rain. They didn't growl, didn't bark. They simply stood watching, not blocking her path out of malice, but guarding it with purpose. Rain was still falling when Sheriff Marcus Doyle turned his headlights onto the forest trail. The creek had overflown earlier that evening, and he'd been driving slow through the back roads, checking for flood damage. He wasn't expecting anything more than a few fallen limbs, maybe a stray deer. What he saw instead stopped his breath cold. A girl in a red raincoat stood near the far bank of the swollen creek, soaked to the bone, clutching something in her arms. A puppy, limp, but breathing. And around her, like sentinels, summoned from the woods, stood 7 large German shepherds, forming a wide arc between her and the trees. They didn't move. Not when his stires crunched gravel. Not when his door creaked open. Not even when his boots hit the mud. He didn't reach for his weapon. Somehow he knew not to. The girl didn't look afraid. She didn't speak either. She just stood there, eyes wide, one hand resting protectively on the little dog in her arms. One of the adult shepherds stepped forward. Note aggressively, slow, deliberate. Its ears twitched. Rain dripped from its thick coat. Then, just a few feet from Laya, it stopped and lowered its head. Not in fear, not in submission. The movement was quiet, careful, almost hesitant, and somehow it felt intentional. It was as if the dog understood something unspoken, as if it had seen the little girl step into the flood when no one else would, as if this simple, silent gesture was the only way it knew how to say, "I saw what you did, and I trust you." Laya didn't move. She didn't even blink. She stood there, soaked and trembling, holding the tiny pup close to her chest, and for a moment there was no rain, no creek, no fear, just a child and a creature. 2 quiet hearts recognizing each other. The pack behind parted slowly, giving her a path. Sheriff Doyle exhaled and stepped forward. He extended a hand, not toe grab, just to offer. Laya didn't take it, but she walked toward him, the puppy pressed to her chest, the dogs following behind like a quiet honor guard. No words were exchanged. No one needed to speak. The storm did all the talking. They got home just before dawn. Rachel had been frantic when she opened the door to see Sheriff Doyle carrying a muddy, silent Laya in his arms, her reed raincoat soaked and clinging to her skin. Nestled against her chest, almost hidden beneath her chin, was the tiny German shepherd pup. His eyes blinked sleepily as if the storm hadn't happened at all. Rachel didn't speak. She only nodded, arms open as Sheriff transferred her daughter into. Later that morning, after warm baths and dry clothes, Laya sat curled on the living room rug beside the fire. The puppy, whom she had already named Ash, lay sprawled across her lap, belly up, twitching in a dream. Rachel made tea, unsure if she should speak. Dr. Eleanor Graves, the child therapist who had been working with them for nearly 2 years, arrived not long after sunrise. Rachel led her to the dining table, where a small stack of drawings lay neatly arranged. Drawings Laya had made long before last night. One by one, Dr. Graves flipped through them, hairy brows furrowed. "These aren't new," Rachel said softly. They were tucked under her bed. Each page was filled with precise, quiet observations. A black Anton shepherd standing watch near a tree stump. The inside of a rocky overhang, shadowed but dry. A trail winding along the north ridge marked with claw prints. "She's been watching them," Graves whispered, "for a long time." Rachel looked toward the living room. Leela hadn't spoken, but something inside her had started to shift like a frozen river beginning to crack under spring sun. Outside in the early light, 7 shapes stood at the edge of the treeine, silent, unmoving. They didn't bark. They didn't approach. They were just there waiting. By the end of the week, thestery had already spread. People talked in hushed voices at the diner. The grocery clerk whispered to the mail carrier. At the hardware store, someone swore. They saw the dogs themselves, lined up like soldiers just watching. And then the first sheep went missing. A rancher on the south end of town found 2 lambs dead. Another gone entirely. No tracks he could follow. No signs of struggle. Just silence and blood in the grass. 2 nights later, it happened again, this time to Caleb Turner, one of the most respected cattlemen in Silver Hollow. He didn't hesitate. "These aren't pets," Caleb said at the emergency town meeting, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "They're wild, dangerous, organized. If we don't act now, it'll be a child next." Rachel sat at the back of the community hall, Weiler's, hand curled tightly in hers. She didn't speak yet, but her eyes were sharp, darting nervously from face to face, reading every line of fear, every flicker of anger. The words bounced off the wooden walls like warnings. Wild, dangerous, a threat. Each one seemed to land on Isla's shoulders like stones. Her grip on Rachel's hand tightened. She had seen how the pack moved, how they watched, how they bowed. They weren't monsters. They were her friends, and now these people, these adults, wanted to hurt them. Her throat ached with something she couldn't say, but her eyes burned. Sheriff Doyle stood at the front, arms crossed. He looked tired. "We don't have proof," he said. "They haven't harmed a person, and I was there that night. What I saw didn't look like aggression, but Caleb wouldn't budge. Intentions mean nothing when your livestock's torn to pieces." A vote was called. Half the room raised their hands for removal. A smaller number Rachel the sheriff. A few quiet allies voted to delay. Outside, as the crowd filtered into the street, Rachel turned to Doyle. "If they move forward with this, I can't stop them," he said. "But I'll buy you time." The house was quiet that night. Too quiet. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, her tea untouched, staring at nothing. Ash was asleep on the rug, tail twitching in a dream. And Laya hadn't said a word since the meeting. Not that that was unusual. But tonight, her silence felt heavier. Not withdrawn, not lost, just focused. She sat on the living room floor, legs folded, sketchbook in her lap. A pencil moved steadily in her hand. No hesitation, no wasted lines. Rachel watched from the hallway, afraid to interrupt. When the drawing was done, Laya slid the paper forward. A map detailed, deliberate, stunningly accurate. The northern ridge, the dry creek bed, a narrow gap between 2 boulders, trails that weren't on any public record. "She's been there," Rachel whispered. The next morning, Rachel placed the map on the desk in front of Dr. Graves and Sheriff Doyle. "She drew this last night from memory, and every trail matches what we found on the old ranger maps." Doyle raised an eyebrow. "You sure? She's never been taken that deep into the woods. Not with me, but look at this." Rachel pointed to a small mark half-shaded, a rock overhang with a tree split down the middle. "That's real. I saw it once." Dr. Graves ran her fingers along the pencilines. "She's not imagining it. She's remembering." Doyle sat back. "And you think this is where they live?" Rachel nodded. "Or at least where they go to feel safe." There was a pause. "Then we need to get to them first," Doyle said, "before Caleb does." Rachel hesitated, then turned to Laya. "Will you take us there?" Leela didn't speak. She simply picked up the map, stood, and walked to the door. She had already decided. The next morning broke with a sky the color of slate. Rachel packed a small bag, first aid kit, water, spare clothes for Laya, while Sheriff Doyle checked his radio and scanned the weather reports. The forecast showed clear skies, but his gut said otherwise. By mid-morning, the 3 of them were hiking north, following the map Laya had drawn with eerie precision. She walked ahead of them, not speaking, but moving with quiet confidence. Her steps never faltered. She paused, now and then, not to think, but to listen, and each time she adjusted course ever so slightly, like someone who understood the forest in ways others didn't. It was nearly noon when they saw them. 7 German shepherds, lying low in a shallow ravine near a cluster of rocks. Ash, now running freely beside Laya, yipped once and bounded down toward the others. The pack didn't flinch. They rose slowly, one by one, their eyes calm, steady, locked on Leela. She raised a hand, not a command, just a greeting. The alpha stepped forward, touched noses with Ash, then turned its gaze to the humans behind her. It didn't growl, didn't run. Rachel whispered, "They trust her." Sheriff Doyle nodded. "Let's move." But just as they began leading the pack toward a safer ridge farther north, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. A gunshot. "Get down!" Doyle shouted. Caleb Turner's voice rang, out from above. "They're here. Don't let them scatter." Men emerged from the trees, rifles raised, faces hard. The dogs froze. Rachel shielded Laya, pulling her close, but Laya broke free. "No!" she cried, her voice raw, shaking, but real. She sprinted toward the dogs, just as Ash darted into the trees. She followed instinctively, feet pounding the wet earth. A moment later, the ground gave way beneath her. The scream tore from her throat as she slipped down a steep incline, tumbling through brush and stone, landing hard on a narrow ledge. She didn't move. From above, the pack began to howl, not in fear, but in warning. Ash appeared first, skidding to her side, licking her cheek, nudging her gently. One by one, the rest of the pack came into view, forming a protective ring around her broken, silent body, and they waited. The rescue team arrived just before sunset. Leela was conscious, but barely. A gash above her brow bled steadily and her ankle was clearly broken. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just clutched Ash to her chest and stared up at the forest canopy. Eyes glassy. The ledge was narrow. It took careful maneuvering, ropes, and 2 medics to lift her safely back up the ridge. Rachel ran to her daughter the moment her boots hit the soil. "I'm here," she whispered, tears already spilling down her face. "You're okay." Caleb Turner stood a few feet away, rifle still slung over his shoulder, face unreadable. But what he'd just seen, that girl chasing after the pack, throwing herself into danger to protect them, was not something he could ignore. He looked past Rachel to where the 7 dogs stood just beyond the clearing. They hadn't run. They hadn't bared teeth. They just watched. Not like predators, like sentinels. Then soft Rachel thought she imagined it. Laya's lips moved. "They'll come back," she whispered, her voice scratchy from disuse. They promised. Everyone around her went still. Rachel dropped to her knees, her hand on Laya's cheek. "Say that again." Laya blinked, her face pale but clear. They promised. And just like that, after 3 years of silence, the world opened up again. Caleb lowered his head, exhaling slowly. "I was wrong," he said. "About them? About her?" He turned to Rachel, his voice low. Rachel nodded, her face ester with relief. Beside her, Laya closed her eyes. Ash curled against her side. And in the distance, the pack faded silently into the trees. Spring came again to Silver Hollow, this time slower, kinder. The snow melted without violence. The river kept its shape. Theskys stayed calm. Nature, it seemed, had remembered how to breathe. So had Laya. She spoke now, not much and not loudly. But when she did, her words carried weight. At school, she had made 2 close friends. She still didn't like crowds, but she laughed sometimes. And when she did, Rachel would stop what she was doing just to listen. Ash, now fully grown, rarely left. Her side. He walked her to school each morning and waited patiently until the final bell rang. No leash, no commands, just trust and the pack. They had returned slowly, cautiously. Never close, never far. Every so often, Rachel would spot one in the trees at dusk, half-shadowed, but still watching, waiting, not for food or shelter, for her. Rachel had begun air search initiative, this time with Caleb Turner's full cooperation. He helped build observation posts near the woods. Together they documented pack behavior, how they traveled, how they nested, how they protected one another. Caleb never spoke much during their sessions, but he listened closely, and sometimes he smiled. One evening, as twilight settled over their home, Rachel passed by Wyler's room and paused. Her daughter sat by the window, sketching with charcoal. The page showed the pack drawn in perfect stillness, and beside them stood a figure, a man in ranger boots, flannel shirt, his face turned slightly to the side. What stood out weren't the details but the eyes. They were her father's. Rachel's breath caught. "Who's that?" she asked softly. Laya looked up. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just said he walks with him. Rachel didn't need more. Not science. Not proof. Just the knowing, deep and silent, that maybe love doesn't disappear. Maybe it finds new footsteps and walks quietly beside those we leave behind.